In the crystalline chambers of the Lemurian High Court, light danced and flickered across the translucent walls like a symphony of stars. The assembled nobles pulsed with subtle hues of blue and gold, their natural bioluminescence expressing the discomfort they dare not voice aloud. At the center of their attention stood Princess Naira, heir to the Lemurian throne, her silvery skin lacking the characteristic glow that defined her species. Born into a civilization where communication through light was as natural as breathing, Naira's condition made her an anomaly. The Lemurians were beings of pure energy and light, their emotions and thoughts shared through complex patterns of illumination that rippled across their bodies. But Naira had been born without the ability to perceive or produce these vital signals, a condition the court physicians had named lightblind. Despite her royal status, whispers followed her through the palace corridors. The nobles called her the Darkened One when they thought she couldn't hear, their luminescent patterns dimming to muted purples of disapproval whenever she passed. Yet Naira had developed other ways of understanding her world, through touch, through sound, through the subtle vibrations that coursed through the crystal architecture of their world. Her father, Emperor Raylon, stood beside her now, his form blazing with protective amber light. "The council has assembled," he announced, his voice carrying the formal tones of court procedure. "They seek to address the matter of succession." Naira's hands tightened around the crystalline staff she used for balance, its surface humming with stored energy. She had known this day would come, had prepared for it since she was old enough to understand what her condition meant to her people. The Lemurian Empire spanned 3 solar systems, its influence maintained through a complex network of light-based technologies and communication systems that she could neither see nor control. Council Elder Viros stepped forward, his ancient form shimming with bands of formal white light. "Your Majesty, honored court, we must speak of that which cannot remain in shadow. The heir apparent's condition poses unprecedented challenges to our way of life. How can one who cannot perceive the light lead a civilization built upon its very essence?" The chamber erupted in a cascade of agreeing frequencies, light patterns rippling through the assembled nobles like waves through a luminescent sea. Naira felt the vibrations of their discord through the crystal floor beneath her feet, each pulse a reminder of the barrier that separated her from her people. But she had not spent her years in darkness waiting to be dismissed. With careful, practiced movements, she stepped forward. The crystal staff in her hands began to hum with increasing intensity, and she pressed her fingers to specific points along its length, points she had memorized through countless hours of study and practice. The staff responded to her touch, projecting a complex holographic display above the council chamber. 3-dimensional star maps, trade routes, and diplomatic protocols danced in the air, each annotation marked with both light patterns and tactile interfaces she had developed herself. "I cannot see the light that flows through our people," Naira spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "But I have learned to understand it in ways none of you have considered. While you communicate through luminescence alone, I have developed systems that bridge the gap between light and touch, between visual signals and physical sensation." She gestured to the hovering displays. "These are my solutions to governing an empire I cannot see. Every protocol, every tradition, every method of communication has been adapted, not diminished. I have not asked our civilization to step into darkness, I have found new ways to interpret our light." The chamber fell silent, even the subtle ambient glow of the nobles dimming in contemplation. Emperor Raylon's light pulsed with pride, a warmth Naira could feel radiating through the space between them. Elder Viros moved closer, his ancient form studying the holographic displays with increasing interest. "These adaptations, they could be useful beyond your personal needs. There are trading species who cannot perceive our light speech, colonies on worlds where our bioluminescence is less effective." "Precisely," Naira replied, allowing herself a small smile. "My condition has forced me to think beyond our traditional methods. Every solution I've developed to navigate my world can be applied to strengthen our empire's connections with other species, other worlds." The council chamber began to fill with thoughtful murmurs and curious light patterns. Naira continued to demonstrate her innovations, each example challenging centuries of assumptions about how their civilization must function. She had spent years preparing for this moment, turning what many saw as her greatest weakness into a source of unprecedented innovation. As the session drew to a close, even her strongest critics had fallen into contemplative silence. Her father's voice carried across the chamber with quiet authority. Perhaps we have been too quick to assume that difference means disadvantage. My daughter's unique perspective may be exactly what our empire needs as we face an ever-changing galaxy. Naira stood tall, her unseeing eyes fixed on the future she knew she could help create. She had taken the first step toward changing her people's understanding of capability and worth. But greater challenges lay ahead, challenges that would require allies who could see beyond the surface, beyond tradition, beyond the light itself. The United Earth diplomatic vessel, Horizon Dawn, emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Lemurian space, its hull reflecting the ethereal glow of the system's twin stars. In his private quarters, Ambassador James Harrison studied the holographic display of the Lemurian capital world, Luminera, while making final adjustments to the neural interface band around his wrist. 20 years of developing adaptive technologies for deep space exploration had led to this moment. Earth had spent decades attempting to establish meaningful contact with the Lemurian Empire, but the fundamental differences in communication had created an almost insurmountable barrier. Previous diplomatic missions had relied on crude light-based translation devices that could only approximate the complex language of the Lemurians. James absently rubbed the scarring along his left temple, a reminder of the accident that had nearly ended his career 15 years ago. The neural damage had left him with an unusual form of synesthesia, allowing him to perceive electrical and electromagnetic signals as tactile sensations. What had initially seemed like a career-ending disability had become the foundation for his groundbreaking work in xenocommunication. Ambassador, the ship's AI announced, the Lemurian escort vessels are approaching. They're transmitting welcome protocols. James closed his eyes, focusing on the subtle tingles from his neural interface. The Lemurian signals felt like gentle ripples across his skin, a language of light translated into touch. Acknowledge their greeting, he instructed. Transmit the formal response sequence we prepared. The escort ships guided them through the crystalline structures that orbited Luminera, each one humming with complex patterns of light that James could feel through his interface. The capital city below was a masterpiece of luminescent architecture, towers of living crystal that pulsed with the collective consciousness of its inhabitants. As they descended toward the diplomatic landing zone, James reviewed the latest cultural briefings. The Lemurian Empire was facing unprecedented challenges. Their light-based technology was proving increasingly difficult to adapt for trade with other species, and their rigid adherence to traditional forms of communication had limited their ability to expand their influence. What the briefings didn't explain was why he'd been specifically requested for this mission by name. The answer became clear the moment he entered the reception chamber. Among the brilliantly glowing forms of the Lemurian court stood a figure different from the rest, Princess Naira, the light-blind heir whose recent defense of her right to rule had caused ripples throughout the sector. She stood with quiet dignity, holding a crystalline staff that hummed with complex technological harmonies that James could feel through his interface. Emperor Raylon's form brightened in formal greeting. Ambassador Harrison, we welcome you to Luminera. Your reputation as an innovator in adaptive communications precedes you. James bowed, his neural interface transmitting the appropriate light patterns through his diplomatic robes. The honor is mine, Your Majesty. Earth has long hoped for closer ties with the Lemurian Empire. As have we, Naira spoke, stepping forward. Particularly since learning of your work with neural tactile interfaces. She held out her staff, and James felt its frequencies shift, reaching out to interact with his own interface. The sensation was remarkable, like two instruments finding harmony. Fascinating, he murmured, his scientific curiosity overtaking diplomatic formality. You've developed a tactile interface for light speech. The principles are similar to my own work, but you've achieved a level of integration I've only theorized about. The assembled court rippled with surprised light patterns as Naira and James began an animated discussion of their respective technologies, each finding in the other an unexpected understanding of their unique challenges and solutions. "Your neural interface," Naira observed, "it allows you to feel light patterns as physical sensations." "Yes, though it was more accident than design initially. A quirk of neural rewiring after an injury became the basis for a new way of understanding light-based communication. Much like how my inability to perceive traditional light speech led me to develop new methods of interaction," Naira replied, a smile touching her features. "Perhaps limitations only exist until we find another path around them." Emperor Raylon moved forward, his light patterns expressing both hope and calculation. "This is why we requested you specifically, Ambassador Harrison. Your unique perspective and technological innovations align with changes our empire must consider. We stand at a crossroads. Our traditional methods of communication limit our ability to interact with other species, yet change does not come easily to our people." James understood the unspoken implications. His presence here wasn't just about diplomatic relations, it was about demonstrating that difference could be an asset, that adaptation didn't mean loss of identity. The princess had already begun this journey, and now they were hoping Earth's experience with adaptive technologies could help ease their transition into a more connected galaxy. "Your Majesty," James replied carefully, "Earth's history is filled with moments where necessity drove innovation, where challenges led to transformative solutions. We've learned that strength often lies in diversity of perspective and approach." The chamber hummed with thoughtful light patterns, and James felt through his interface the complex interplay of hope and uncertainty among the gathered nobles. Change was never easy, especially for a civilization as ancient and established as the Lemurian Empire. Naira's voice carried across the chamber with quiet authority. "Ambassador Harrison's presence offers us an opportunity. His methods of bridging communication gaps could complement the adaptive systems I've developed. Together, we might forge solutions that serve not just my needs or Earth's interests, but the future of both our peoples." As the formal reception continued, James found his attention repeatedly drawn to the princess. Here was someone who, like him, had turned personal challenges into innovations that could benefit entire civilizations. But beneath the diplomatic opportunities and technological possibilities, he sensed deeper currents of change beginning to stir, currents that would soon test both their abilities to navigate uncharted waters. The research facility beneath the crystal spires of the Imperial Palace hummed with unprecedented activity. In the month since Ambassador Harrison's arrival, the space had transformed into a fusion of Earth and Lemurian technology. Holographic displays danced alongside traditional light pattern interfaces, while prototype communication devices lined the crystalline workbenches. Naira's fingers moved deftly across a hybrid console, its surface responding to both touch and light signals. "The neural tactile response is much smoother now," she noted, as James adjusted parameters on his own interface. "The lag time between light speech and physical sensation is almost imperceptible." "The key was incorporating your crystalline technology," James replied, watching the data streams flow through their combined system. Earth's neural interfaces were efficient, but they lacked the organic flexibility of Lemurian crystals. Together, they're creating something entirely new. Their work had already begun to draw attention throughout the Empire. What had started as adaptations for Naira's unique condition was evolving into innovations that could revolutionize how Lemurians interacted with other species. Trading partners who had previously struggled with light-based communications were showing renewed interest in diplomatic relations. But not everyone welcomed these changes. High Counselor Theron entered the laboratory, his form pulsing with barely contained disapproval. "Princess Naira, the Council requests your presence. There are concerns about the direction of these experiments." Naira straightened, her hand tightening slightly on her staff. "Of course, Counselor. Ambassador Harrison will accompany me, as these developments affect our diplomatic relations with Earth." The council chamber was tense when they arrived, the assembled nobles emanating patterns of agitation that James could feel through his interface. Elder Viros stood at the center, his ancient form flickering with traditional formal patterns. Your Highness, Viros began, while we acknowledge the potential benefits of these adaptations, there are growing concerns about their impact on our cultural identity. For millennia, the purity of light speech has been the foundation of our civilization. With respect, Elder, Naira responded, purity need not mean stagnation. Our empire was built on the mastery of light, yes, but also on the wisdom to evolve when necessary. James stepped forward, his interface projecting appropriate formal patterns. If I may, the history of Earth has shown that cultural identity isn't diminished by new forms of communication, it's enriched. The Lemurian mastery of light won't be lost by creating bridges to other methods of understanding. And yet, Theron interjected, these changes began with accommodating a single individual's limitations. Now we speak of transforming our entire society. The words hung in the air like frozen light, but Naira didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her staff, activating a complex display that filled the chamber. Trade routes illuminated, showing increased activity. Diplomatic exchanges sparkled with new connections. Economic projections spiraled upward. These are not just accommodations for me, she declared. Look at the data. Since implementing our hybrid communication systems, trade efficiency has increased by 40%. Diplomatic misunderstandings have decreased by 60%. 3 new species have opened negotiations for full diplomatic relations. James added his own data to the display, showing the broader galactic context. The galaxy is changing. Species that once seemed incompatible are finding ways to connect and cooperate. The empires that thrive will be those that can adapt while maintaining their core identity. A younger council member, Lysandra, moved forward, her light patterns expressing thoughtful curiosity. The princess and the ambassador raise valid points. Our traditions are valuable precisely because they can guide us through change, not because they prevent it. The debate continued, but something had shifted. More nobles were engaging with the data, asking questions about practical applications rather than just expressing concerns about tradition. James noticed how Naira handled each query with patience and precision, demonstrating time and again how innovation could strengthen rather than weaken their civilization. As the session drew to a close, Emperor Raylon made a surprising announcement. In light of these developments, we will be establishing a new Imperial Institute for Adaptive Communications, under the joint leadership of Princess Naira and Ambassador Harrison. The declaration sent ripples of shocked light patterns through the chamber. Such a position would give Naira unprecedented authority to implement changes throughout the empire, while elevating a human to equal partnership was virtually unheard of. Later, in a quiet corridor of the palace, Naira turned to James. They'll see this as further proof that I'm disrupting the natural order, she said softly. Change always faces resistance, James replied, his interface picking up the subtle stress patterns in the crystal walls around them. But you're proving that different doesn't mean deficient. Every innovation you create shows them a future they hadn't imagined possible. Naira's fingers traced patterns on her staff, creating gentle harmonies that James could feel through his interface. When I was younger, I thought my condition was a curse. Now I understand it was perspective I needed to see beyond our limitations. We all have our blind spots, James said thoughtfully. Sometimes it takes someone who sees differently to show us what we're missing. As they discussed plans for the new institute, neither noticed the shadow that moved through a distant corridor, nor the way certain light patterns in the palace crystals flickered with encrypted messages. Change was coming to the Lemurian Empire, but not everyone was willing to accept a future that challenged thousands of years of tradition. In the depths of the ancient city, behind walls of dark crystal that absorbed light rather than transmitting it, those who opposed change were already gathering. They had tolerated the blind princess's experiments as mere curiosities, but this new partnership with Earth threatened everything they held sacred. The time was coming when they would have to choose between acceptance and action. Deep beneath the luminescent spires of the capital, in a chamber shielded with light-absorbing crystals, High Counselor Theron addressed the assembled shadows. Our worst fears have been realized. The blind princess and her human ally have begun implementing their changes throughout the empire. They call it progress. We know it as corruption. The gathered conspirators pulsed with dark agreement, their light patterns muted and sinister. Among them stood members of ancient noble houses, traditionalist priests, and military commanders who had watched with growing alarm as their perfect society began to change. The emperor has forgotten our ways, Theron continued, allowing his daughter's weakness to infect our entire civilization. Now this human teaches us to abandon light speech for crude physical signals. It cannot continue. Above, in the newly established Institute for Adaptive Communications, Naira and James were unaware of the gathering storm. They worked side by side, their different perspectives combining to create solutions neither could have developed alone. The neural crystal interface is ready for wider testing, James announced, monitoring the readings on their latest prototype. The response from the trading guilds has been overwhelming. They see the potential for breaking down communication barriers across species. Naira nodded, her fingers dancing across the control surface. And the military applications are promising. Our fleet commanders report better coordination with non-Lemurian allies during joint exercises. But their success had made them careless. Neither noticed when their secure communication channels began carrying subtle encrypted signals, nor when certain security protocols were quietly adjusted. The shadows were moving into position. The first sign of trouble came during a demonstration for foreign diplomats. As Naira prepared to showcase their latest innovations, the crystal technology throughout the institute suddenly went dark. Emergency systems failed to activate, leaving the facility in unprecedented silence. James felt it first through his neural interface, a wrongness in the crystal harmonics. Naira, something's interfering with the base frequencies. This isn't a normal malfunction. Before they could react, light troops burst into the chamber, their forms blazing with aggressive patterns. At their head stood Theron, his presence radiating cold authority. Princess Naira, Ambassador Harrison, you are charged with conspiracy against the Empire. Your experiments end now. But Naira and James had prepared for resistance, if not outright betrayal. The princess's staff hummed to life, operating on independent power cells. James's neural interface switched to autonomous mode, maintaining their connection despite the facility's shutdown. Conspiracy. Naira's voice was sharp with disbelief. We've strengthened the Empire, opened new possibilities for growth and cooperation. You've polluted our pure light speech with primitive physical interfaces, Theron countered. You would have us abandon thousands of years of tradition for your corrupted vision of progress. The foreign diplomats watched in shock as the confrontation unfolded. Among them, representatives from Earth's diplomatic corps reached for communication devices, surely alerting their superiors to the crisis. James stepped forward, his interface projecting calm, reasonable light patterns. Your traditions aren't under attack, counselor. We're building bridges, not destroying foundations. Look at the evidence, trade is flourishing, diplomatic relations are stronger than ever. Evidence? Theron scoffed. I see only weakness spreading through our society like a virus. The Lemurian Empire was built on the perfection of light speech. We will not watch it be dismantled by a blind princess and her human pet. But even as he spoke, something unexpected was happening. The visiting diplomats, witnessing this clash between progress and tradition, began activating their own communication devices. Through them, the scene was being broadcast across diplomatic channels throughout the sector. Naira sensed the shift in the room's energy. You speak of perfection, Theron, but true strength lies in adaptation. Every civilization that survived contact with others did so by growing, learning, changing. Those that refused to adapt became stagnant and fell. Her words carried weight, especially among the watching diplomats. They had seen the benefits of the new hybrid technologies, had experienced firsthand how barriers between species could be overcome. James's neural interface picked up increasing agitation among Theron's troops. Not all of them were comfortable with this very public coup attempt. Some of their light patterns showed confusion, doubt. Your actions here, James addressed the conspirators, are being witnessed by representatives from a dozen worlds. Ask yourselves, what message are you sending about the Lemurian Empire? That it fears change so much it would rather destroy itself than grow. The tension in the chamber was palpable. Theron's carefully planned takeover was unraveling in the face of international attention. But cornered conspirators were often at their most dangerous. If we cannot preserve our civilization through reason, Theron's form blazed with zealous intensity, then we will do so through force. The pure light must be protected, no matter the cost. He raised his hand, and the crystal walls around them began to pulse with increasing power. James's interface screamed warnings, the crystals were being pushed beyond safe operational limits. If they shattered, the released energy would be catastrophic. You would destroy the Institute to save it. Naira's voice cut through the rising crystal harmonics. Look around you, Theron. Look at what fear of change has driven you to become. The confrontation had reached its breaking point. In the next few moments, the future of the Lemurian Empire would be decided, not by force of arms or political maneuvering, but by the choice between embracing change or being broken by it. The Institute's crystal walls thrummed with dangerous energy as Theron's desperate gambit threatened to tear the facility apart. But in that moment of crisis, Naira felt something she had never experienced before, a resonance through her staff, a harmony of light and touch that spoke of new possibilities. James, she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos, the crystal harmonics, can you feel it? There's a pattern. His neural interface was already adapting, sensing what she had discovered. The crystals aren't just storing energy, he replied, they're trying to establish a new frequency. Like they're evolving. Without hesitation, Naira planted her staff firmly on the ground, letting its sensors merge with the facility's crystal matrix. James stepped closer, his neural interface synchronizing with her equipment. Together, they created something unprecedented, a perfect fusion of light speech and tactile communication. The effect was immediate and stunning. The overloading crystals began to pulse with new patterns, their dangerous energy transforming into spectacular displays that everyone in the room could perceive, regardless of their species or sensory capabilities. The light troops lowered their weapons, transfixed by the demonstration. This, Naira announced, her voice carrying across the stunned silence, is what we've been working toward. Not the destruction of tradition, but its evolution. Look around you, every being in this room, Lemurian or not, can understand what these crystals are expressing. Through their combined interfaces, James and Naira projected a visualization of galactic trade routes, diplomatic connections, and cultural exchanges. But now these displays were accessible through multiple sensory channels, light, touch, sound, even subtle variations in crystal resonance. Your fear of losing our identity has blinded you to the greater truth, Naira addressed Theron and his conspirators. Our mastery of light was never meant to isolate us. It was meant to illuminate the way forward. Emperor Raylon entered the chamber, his form radiating authority tempered with wisdom. I have witnessed enough. Theron, your actions today have shown where the true threat to our civilization lies, not in change, but in the fear of it. The Emperor's presence seemed to deflate the remaining resistance. Theron's supporters, seeing their actions broadcast across diplomatic channels and their justifications exposed as mere fear, began to stand down. But Naira wasn't finished. With graceful movements, she adjusted her staff settings, causing the surrounding crystals to emit patterns that translated simultaneously into multiple forms of communication. What you see as my weakness gave me the perspective to see beyond our limitations. Every adaptation we've created doesn't just help me function in our society, it helps our society function better in the galaxy. James added his own insights through their linked interfaces, showing how Earth had faced similar challenges in its history. Progress doesn't mean abandoning who you are, he explained. It means becoming more than you were, while keeping your core identity intact. The watching diplomats began to send messages of support through their networks. Several trading guilds immediately pledged to adopt the new hybrid communication systems. Even some of Theron's former supporters were cautiously experimenting with the adaptive interfaces. The time of isolation is over, Emperor Raylon declared. We cannot hold back the tide of change, nor should we want to. Instead, we will guide it, shape it, make it serve the best interests of all our people. In the days that followed, the attempted coup became a catalyst for transformation. The Institute, far from being destroyed, was expanded. Its innovation spread throughout the empire, breaking down barriers between species and cultures that had once seemed insurmountable. Theron and his core conspirators faced justice, but even their trial demonstrated the changes sweeping through Lemurian society. They were judged not just by traditional light speech protocols, but by new standards that encompassed multiple forms of evidence and testimony. 1 month later, Naira stood before the imperial court again, but this time as a celebrated innovator rather than a questioned heir. We stand at the dawn of a new era, she announced. Our empire was founded on the mastery of light, but it will flourish through the mastery of understanding. James watched from his position as Earth's permanent ambassador to the Lemurian Empire, his neural interface picking up the complex harmonies of a civilization in positive transformation. The traditional light patterns remained, but now they were enriched by new forms of expression, creating a symphony of communication that could be appreciated by all. You know, he said to Naira as they left the court chamber, when I first arrived, I thought I was here to help solve a problem. Instead, I found myself part of a revolution. Naira smiled, her staff humming with contentment. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson in all of this. Sometimes what we perceive as problems are really opportunities waiting to be understood differently. Above them, the crystal spires of the capital pulsed with new patterns, telling the story of a civilization that had learned to see beyond the light, and had become stronger for it. The blind princess and the neural-adapted human had shown them that true strength lies not in resisting change, but in learning to guide it toward a brighter future for all.